Booz Allen is delivering mission-ready solutions, AI-powered, software-defined, and commercial-first. Combining deep mission experience with commercial partnerships, Booz Allen is defining a new defense industrial base. A network that crosses traditional boundaries to scale non-traditional technologies and brings our best tech to the hands of the warfighter faster, effectively delivering technology for today and tomorrow. Booz Allen, accelerating outcomes for today's warfighters.
Hi, welcome to the Emerging Tech Horizons podcast. I'm Arun Serafin, Executive Director of NDIA's Emerging Technologies Institute. We're recording here at NDIA's annual Women in Defense Conference, and I have a great guest, General Michelle Letcher, U.S. Army retired, and also the CEO of Break Trail LLC. You were also the keynote speaker this morning at the Women in Defense Conference. So for those of us who heard it, it was great. For those out there who didn't, tell us kind of the things you talked about.
So one of the things, I talked really about two things. The first is the challenge of operating in an underrepresented space, which is why I think Women in Defense is so important, because it gives us collectively an opportunity to come together and talk about shared challenges and shared opportunities. And then the second part that I really kind of focused on is that I think our strategy in terms of defense, and I use the word defense kind of lightly because I don't think the way we operate in the national security space is actually passive. I think we need to be more, assertive to its plan, but really challenging our assumptions about what the future of warfare is going to look like.
Yeah, I think what you pulled on was a couple of interesting things. At least in my mind, you stimulated this discussion of, we're talking about the name of the department, right? Where I grew up as the Department of Defense, and now it's got a different name, the Department of War. And I think the point you were trying to make is it's maybe, I'm putting words in your mouth, it's somewhere between defense and war.
That's right.
But it's sometimes one or the other. It's sometimes a little bit of both. And I think you were saying that, yeah, we need to realize we have this full spectrum. And one of the areas you highlighted in that full spectrum was cyber in particular. So what were some of your thoughts on how we think about that full spectrum of potential operations in cyber war?
So one of the things I really wanted to pull out is the way we think about future warfare. I think there is a lot of post-war think that still goes on, especially when you look at where we're investing our defense dollars or our war dollars. And cyber is an area that I think we're really at risk if we don't invest more heavily or really focus on our strategy around that. The battlefield now is really borderless, right? Maybe you can't even see who the adversary is, but they're affecting things like our transportation systems or our water supply or elections or public perception through social media. And so the way we really frame that, the way we get after that, I think is really important. And I don't think we're actually focusing our defense strategy in that light. I think it's a lot easier to focus on aircraft carriers, next generation tanks, and things, in my opinion, that an adversary can stop even the execution or employment of through a cyber attack.
Yeah, so both the resourcing side of a posture, which is lined up to face the threats you're talking about, and the workforce development side isn't exactly where we correct right now. The threat side of all that, what's an example that you would see of things going on today that are developing into the sort of the we almost call it gray zone kinds of threat?
So I think a lot of people right now are watching the elections in Moldova to see how those are going to play out. I know the leader of that country is concerned about Russian influence and what the outcome of that would look like. If a candidate who doesn't embrace the West or democracy having to get elected, would Moldova start to, form back into more Russian influence? And if you look where Moldova is located, it's on the other side of Ukraine. And so there's really strategic importance in that without a round being fired, right? But just the influence into an election cycle. And that's just one example. But I think as you watch the rhetoric in different countries, as you watch social media, disinformation campaigns, it's really easy to tilt the perception about what's going on through disinformation.
Right. And you earned your way to that big stage to give that keynote because of this great career that you also got to talk us through. So it's for our viewers here, tell us about your background and how you got to the point how you are today.
So I served about 30 years in the United States Army. I was I came in as an ordnance officer, branch detailed for air defense artillery. I think I spoke this morning about how I wanted to be an armor officer, but that branch was not open to women until 2016. But I did have the honor of moving with an armor battalion during the ground invasion into Iraq as a maintenance company commander in the 3rd Infantry Division. Yes. From there, I was a logistician really almost all of my career. As I became more senior, one of the things I thought that was really interesting is it's tied to the National Defense Industrial Association or Women in Defense. It's my time as the Commander General Joint Relations Command. So commanding, the Fortune Arsenal plants, depots in the conventional munition space. So I do have some, great deal of experience kind of operating there. And then my work from there as the Chief of Ordnance, which is the training and doctrine command aspect of it. And then moving over to Army Futures Command, which is writing concepts, turning them into required capabilities, requirements, programs of record, and then to the arms of soldiers. And so I did talk a little bit about how representation matters in that space and how, all soldiers are the recipients of that, not just male soldiers. So it's very important, for organizations like this to help advocate for what, all soldiers are going to need in that space.
And what are you doing now?
So right now I am running my own LLC, but it's kind of an umbrella over a couple of different things. I do consulting and advising in the defense space, not just with private industry, but also a little bit of work in Europe as well. And then I wrote a book.
What's the name of the book?
Junie in the Middle. And so that one's published and out. That was really just to get my legs under me for publishing. Because the other thing I spoke about this morning, I'll get back to the work that I'm doing. But the other thing I spoke about is really the importance of communicating ourselves. I know there was a lot of concern that people felt like, histories are being wiped away from government sites. But what I said this morning is you don't need a .miller.gov site to tell your story. So people writing, communicating, telling their story is extremely important. It always has been. And so when we think about what, the history books are going to say, we all have this great opportunity to publish and write. So Junie in the Middle was my first attempt to kind of do that. I do write a blog on michelleluncher.com. I also do guest lecturing. So I've done that in the industrial-based space and also for private universities as well. And keynotes. So those are the spaces that I kind of operate in, but really just communicating messages that are really tied to our national security and getting people to think, communicate, and really invest. Because I think, like most Americans, I absolutely love our country. And so anything I can do to contribute to what the future of that's going to look like. And I think I said this morning as well, I have 2 children at the United States Military Academy. So it's not
Congratulations on that.
Thanks. It's not political. It's personal.
Yeah.
So service is personal to me. The future of our country is personal to me. And so any way I can continue to give in that space is really, power.
So one of the themes of the conference, starting with your keynote and through all the breakout sessions all day today, is how do we create that workforce of the future? Whether you're going to put on a uniform like yourself or put on a lab coat, kind of like what I used to do, or I was a Hill staffer or a contracting officer, those kinds of people. How do we create that national security workforce for the future to solve those problems of the nation that you've talked about? How do events like this support those kinds of activities?
So I think this event brings together people who are already operating in that space and people maybe who want to work in that space. And it provides a great networking opportunity. It also allows experts in this field to come and communicate what's going on. So it may spark interest. I think we saw a panel this morning which had a group of young professionals talking about the work that they're doing and, kind of blending that with what other people in the audience are doing so we can kind of build on that workforce. Another thing I talked about in my keynote this morning is what does the future of the workforce look like? And women are part of that solution for national security. And so what skill sets do women in this nation bring in the defense space? And how can we utilize that to bring the whole of nation to what security and stability looks like in the future?
Yeah, it's a pretty simple equation, right? Those nations that make best use of their resources position themselves better in every kind of global competition.
That's right.
Whether it's an economic competition, a technological competition, or a national security competition. One piece of that is learning how to dig the stuff out of the ground and turn it into whatever you want. Another piece of that is using your whole population. And so I think the story you told about your own career, about how it hasn't always been the easiest thing, for someone in your position to make the contributions that you're fully capable of. I think one of the hopes here is that we work together to try to take down some of those barriers so that the nation does what it does best, which is make the best use of its nation's talent.
And it has to be deliberate, which I spoke about this morning as well. We've got to put women in those spaces. And when you walk into a room, which I think we heard one young lady say today, you're one of 18 and you're the only female, you start to wonder, is there a pathway for success for me here professionally? Is this where I want to invest my time, my intellectual energy? And so I believe it's going to have to be a deliberate attempt by women to bring other women along on that journey. Because I think history has shown us that men don't typically do that. People tend to help those who resemble that.
Right.
And so unless, you are in a workplace where people bring everyone along, you could be left behind. And so once again, an event like this is an opportunity to see where there is space to grow so you can invest that energy.
Are there particular, in science, we'd call them tribes, that are particularly good at this? Is there any part of the military or the army where you say, yeah, they're closest to getting this right?
And I would say academia is a place where you can see that start to work itself out. And I think that's because, women have historically been primarily the educators, from high school and below in our school systems. And I think we see a lot of young women going to school and continuing their advanced degrees and kind of operating in that space. So although I'm not an expert in academia, I would say that that's a space I think you see women getting a little bit more of a voice. And when we talk about the STEM work that, women are doing, what you heard today is women who are staying in those academic circles and doing their research and finding a space to move ahead there. But it's going to have to be bigger than that if we're talking about security and stability.
Right.
And what I said this morning, we have to let women lead.
Right.
They're qualified.
Right.
We have to give them the opportunity to do that. And that's not a quota system. That's not a lowering the standard system. That's maximizing the talent of your nation.
It's making use of
exploiting
resources.
Right?
Right.
And saying this is what's going to make us stronger.
Right.
And I don't, I've done a lot of work in a lot of different countries. It's not that the U.S. is, holding back and other countries are doing well. This is a global problem. This is not a national problem.
So last question, just if you were looking at young officers at, a stage of career that you were at a while ago in this environment, what would you tell them right now?
I would tell them, we didn't really have mentorship when I was younger. Like that word kind of came out towards the end of my career. I would encourage people to seek out people who can help them on this journey, whether they decide to stay in uniform, get out of uniform, whatever, enterprise or, space they operate in. If you're passionate about that, find somebody to help you through it, because it's not easy for a man or a woman to navigate the workspace, right? But I would say in a place where where you don't have representation, it can be even more challenging. So networking opportunities with organizations like this really provide you the empowerment, a place to lean in. Your mentor should never be your boss. I think people make that mistake a lot of times. They think their supervisor, because they have a lot of respect for them, will make a great mentor. But, leaders are looking at the organization, not individuals. So find somebody that you can be vulnerable, you can be real, you can be raw, you can have a bad day with to help you through that journey. And then understand, you're leaving a legacy, right? And so invest what you're going to leave behind for the next generation. And that's really be proud of the work that you're doing. Allow yourself to have bad days and allow yourself to, surround yourself with the support system that really helps you excel.
That's great. General Michelle Letcher was the keynote speaker today at Women in Defense event. She's CEO of Break Trail LLC. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Have a great day.